Ever since the release of Deltarune Chapter 1, there have been theories. Countless, numerous theories. From if Sans Deltarune is the same Sans as Sans Undertale, to if Noelle would play Overwatch, to if anyone would remember Yor. But of all the theories, the main thing on the community's mind is, of course, the identity of the Roaring Knight. And while I've seen a few different theories on who the Knight's identity could be myself, there is one theory I had myself while playing that I found myself surprised after finishing the game and finding that no one else seemed to be talking about it online. While some of the popular suggestions I've seen for the Roaring Knight recently have been characters like Des, Rudy, Carol, or even Chris, but there's one aspect all of these characters share that I believe differs from the Roaring Knight. Actually, almost every suspect for the Roaring Knight I've seen suggested had one thing in common. Almost every theory I've seen talking about the Roaring Knight's identity believed the Roaring Knight to be a Lightner. Not only do I believe the Roaring Knight is a Darkner, I believe that we've already seen which object represents them in the Light World. Chris's knife. The same knife used by Chris to open the Chapter 3 Dark World. Okay. Now before you rush to the comment section or click off the video, I know there are a lot of counter-arguments to this theory. Mainly, Susie explicitly says that she saw the silhouette of the Knight in the Light World after the Knight makes off to the bunker with Undyne at the end of Chapter 3, which leads Susie to the conclusion that the Knight must be a Lightner. I don't think it is unlike Toby Fox to throw in a red herring or 20 into his games, and I believe this is one of those instances. Another potential counterpoint, if the Roaring Knight is a Darkner, that can't be the one who physically opens the Dark Fountains in the Light World. However, given we can piece together that Chris, Carol, and the Knight clearly seem to be working together, I believe there's an explanation that, quite honestly, feels like it makes too much sense when I think about it. Though, you're just gonna have to trust me on that and let me explain how I even came to this conclusion that the Knight was a Darkner in the first place. And in order to do that, we need to talk about Gerson. Back in Chapter 2 of Deltarune, curious players who explored Hometown were able to find the grave of the late Gerson Boom, a recurring character from Undertale who later appears in Chapter 4's Dark World. For anyone who missed this, or didn't recognize the character from Undertale, after escaping the church's first Dark Fountain, the player and Susie discover that Gerson was in fact a Darkner. In the Light World, he was just a hammer covered in the late Gerson's dust. This whole time while they were talking to him in the Dark World, Gerson was already dead. After this, Susie reopens the Dark World. Make a note of this too, since it will come up again later, but Susie specifically opens the fountain using Chris's knife. Or, if this theory is correct, the Roaring Knight itself. In Susie's Dark World, we can tell things are wrong. Something is different this time compared to every other time we've entered a Dark World. The colors are different, the pianos are violent, and most importantly, something is now very wrong with Gerson. Later in the Dark Fountain, Chris and Susie confront what they believe to be Gerson in pitch black. He's silent, continuously attacking the party. Susie doesn't understand why he would do this. He was such a nice guy just a few minutes ago, and after a long fight, it ends with Susie's healing magic lighting up the room just enough to reveal Gerson's face. Monstrous, drained of life and color. My initial reaction during the fight was I thought Gerson was an undead skeleton. Like if Dry Bowser got old and started swinging a hammer around instead of being impossible to unlock in Mario Kart Wii. I had gone into the fight expecting Susie's revelation that Gerson was dead the whole time would affect his form in the Dark World. At least it would in her Dark World. But then, after the fight, goddamn Toothpaste Boy has the audacity to come in and try and derail everything I believed in! Relsik comes in and claims that, in reality, what we were fighting is not Gerson, but was in fact a statue of him from his study that just started moving for no reason in particular. Thankfully, if Goat Simulator gift card over here has been very clear about one thing, Chapter 4, it's that he will always try to obscure the truth or tell white lies for the rest of the party if he believes the truth would hurt them or affect them negatively in any way. Basically, he's completely full of shit here, and he's just trying to spare Susie's feelings, which her and the community as a whole totally fell for. Hook, line, and sinker. The statue of Gerson we fight is the real Gerson, or at least, it's the real Darkner version of Gerson. If you're not convinced, I actually wasn't going crazy when I initially perceived Gerson to be skeletal. The game has two distinct sprites for this version of Gerson, and during the fight, when we can see him in the glow of Susie's magic, his helmet is removed. A sunken, empty eye socket. Teeth not covered by any lips or skin. We're staring at Gerson's corpse, not just some statue, but once Peach Boy turns the lights on, the statue is clearly wearing a helmet. I refuse to believe, no matter the rules of the Dark World, that this sprite is supposed to represent this helmet in different lighting. The head shapes don't line up at all either, especially when overlaid on top of each other. You can clearly see that the helmet is actually a bit bigger than the head we see in the fight, with a beak-like protrusion on the face of the helmet as well. While I know it sounds kinda crazy to suggest that Ralsei put a helmet on the rampaging undead Gerson so he could defeat him without upsetting Susie, that is exactly what I am suggesting, and I fully believe that is what happened here. Though, I do think there's a little bit more to it than that, but I'll come back to it later. Either way, what is the point of all this, you're probably wondering. This is supposed to be a theory video about the Roaring Knight, not fucking the Dry Gerson conspiracy. Well, friends, it is important to cover all of that so that we could be on the same page going into the real meat of this theory. With that in mind, while I denied the notion that Des could be the knight at the start of this video, I believe that, in a twisted way, Des is the Roaring Knight. However, the Roaring Knight itself is a Darkner, born from a knife infused with either the dust, soul, or whatever essence of Des was left after her disappearance in an attempt to bring her back the same way Gerson was brought back in the first Church Dark World. But something went wrong. This part does get a little bit more speculative for a moment, but just bear with me for a minute. I believe Chris is fully aware of the circumstances of Des's disappearance, or if my theory is right, full-on death. Then, once Des's essence was imbued into the Roaring Knife, as I will be calling Chris's knife for the rest of this video, I believe Chris attempted to meet her in the Dark World, only to find a twisted, undead Darkner version of Des instead of anything that resembled the real her, distorted by Chris's knowledge of her death. With Chris seeing this form of Des and understanding that it was in fact Des, I believe that it, in a way, locked the Roaring Knife's Darkner form into the monstrous, almost skeletal Roaring Knight. And for as much flack as I was giving him earlier, I believe if Ralsei hadn't lied and told Susie that Dry Gerson was just a statue, Susie's perception of Gerson, and in turn his Darkner form, would be permanently and irreversibly stuck on dead. While the Roaring Knight does appear to be more intelligent in planning than Dry Gerson, I'm just gonna chalk that up to whatever method was used to imbue Des's essence into the knife being different than how Gerson's hammer was just covered with his dust. As I mentioned earlier, I believe Des's determination to be stored in the Roaring Knife, so more so than just her dust, her soul is probably more likely what's actually contained within the knife. Sorry, just a quick side note as well. While in Undertale, a monster who possessed determination would melt, we see Susie open a dark fountain with our own eyes in Deltarune, and it is explicitly stated in-game that it requires determination in order to open a dark fountain. So we know in Deltarune monsters can have determination. I also think it's very likely that the Roaring Knife itself is one of, if not the only things that could open a dark fountain due to being infused with Des's determination. At least, I believe it's the only thing that can open a dark fountain in the light world. Opening a dark fountain inside of a dark world is a little bit messier. Well, the only time we've truly seen it happen so far has been done by the Knight, which would fit nicely with the Roaring Knife being the only item capable of opening dark fountains. Near the end of Chapter 2, Birdley nearly opens a fountain inside of a dark world using his normal weapon, Well, earlier in the chapter, Queen commands Noelle to open a fountain using an item you can actually equip earlier in the chapter known as the Royal Pin. My answer to these contradictions is that dark fountains can probably just be opened by any sharp object imbued with determination once you are already inside of a dark world. And I know that seems like a cop-out answer, but trust me, I do have some evidence as for why I think the Roaring Knife is special. So, let's talk about Black Shards. The Black Shard is an item the player can obtain by defeating the Roaring Knight in Chapter 3. It is a broken off shard of the Knight's sword, and interestingly enough, we actually see the chipped off section of the blade seemingly regrow, already implying some interesting things about whatever material it's made out of. However, it's probably just as likely this was done to be just one less variable Toby Fox would have had to worry about in creating every future Knight encounter, just by showing the sprite change to not be permanent. While we can use the item as a weapon for Chris in the Dark World, the interesting part of the Black Shard actually comes from inspecting it in the Light World, where its Light World counterpart is the Black Shard. Huh, interesting. Whatever this material is, it doesn't change going from the Dark World into the Light World. But the item description does, and we can pick out a bit more information from there. In the Dark World, checking the Black Shard reads, "A dagger-like shard of the Black Knife strikes the weakness of dark element enemies." While the Overworld description reads, "A small chip of extremely hard glass. Oddly, it's nearly opaque." While that doesn't seem like much at first, there's a lot there I want to talk about. First off, the Dark World referring to the Black Shard as a shard of the Black Knife is kind of crazy when you think about how there seems to be several theories arguing whether the Roaring Knight is using a katana or a wiffle bat or whatever weapon, when the game clearly states the Knight's weapon is called the Black Knife. And we can take that one step further. At the start of the Roaring Knight fight, we see the Black Knife appear from the Knight's hand. However, I find it very unlikely that the Knight was just storing a weapon in its body for whatever reason, especially when we see the Knight can transform its body seemingly at will. I believe it is only natural to assume the Black Knife is just a part of the Roaring Knight. Or more likely, the other way around, since while I've been calling it the Roaring Knife so far in this video, I believe the canon name for Chris's knife will be shown in a later chapter to be the Black Knife. Though I'm still going to call it the Roaring Knife, my name's just better. Sorry, Toby. If you're not sold that the Black Knife connection is as important to the Knight as I'm making it out to be, before I even began researching the Black Shard, one of the biggest pieces of evidence that sent me down this rabbit hole was the Knight's theme, known as Black Knife. In a Toby Fox game especially, I think it is important to highlight just how much storytelling is done through music, and the Knight's theme being named Black Knife is no coincidence. Finally, let's talk about the overworld description of the Black Shard. Initially, my biggest hang-up on this theory was that, well, Chris's knife in the overworld is obviously not black. It's a silver color you'd expect from some sort of blade. But then the light world description for the Black Shard set me right back on track. Nowhere in the light world description is the Black Shard actually described as black. Instead, it is described as nearly opaque, extremely hard glass. Now, while I thought at first there was no way the blade on the Roaring Knife could be made of an opaque glass-like material given how it appears in-game, the more I sat on the thought, the more I started to think, yeah, if Toby told me in a random dialogue box next chapter that the knife Chris was carrying around all this time actually always had a glass blade and that just wasn't immediately obvious because of the game's art style, I would probably buy it. And then I had a crackpot thought. What if the glass was even created using Dessa's dust? How would that even work if I said it was more likely to be Dessa's soul that was combined with the knife rather than her dust earlier in the video? Honestly, I really don't know. I feel like I'm kind of starting to lose the plot on this whole theory around this point, and I feel like I could branch it in so many different directions the more I just keep investigating. So, I'm going to reel things back in a bit for the ending here and just talk about a few extra points in favor of this theory that I think I should mention before closing out the video. With the Black Shard still fresh in mind, I also wanted to mention that there's a hidden scene where we can see that Asgore has gotten himself a Black Shard and seems to have some understanding of its significance. Though I couldn't really find a way to connect that to this theory, aside from the fact that Asgore drawing significance to the shard connects it to Dessa's disappearance, with him even saying he'll show everyone what really happened, and they will all have to believe him this time. If you've got any connections with this scene that I might have missed, feel free to comment them down below. It also lets me know you watched this far into the video, which I greatly appreciate. There's one other thing about Asgore that's important, and I believe that while Chris may not know his father is involved, I believe that Asgore is actually working with Carol towards whatever goal she's trying to achieve. As well, he's most likely the one who carried Undyne into the bunkers, since the Roaring Knight isn't able to exist in the light world. I know some people might disagree with this just because they don't think Asgore would do anything to hurt Toriel. However, he might not even know she's being targeted. Given the Knights seem to try to absorb Toriel instead of whisking her away to the bunker like they did with Undyne, I don't think Asgore would have even had to kidnap Toriel if the Knight had succeeded in capturing her. Instead, I believe she would have vanished entirely, just like Des. Cutting away from Asgore now, the final point I want to say with this theory is that I believe Chris is the person who has opened every Dark Fountain up until now, aside from the one we see opened by Susie. And yes, that does include the Church Dark Fountains as well. I've seen many people say there is no time for Chris to open those two specific fountains, and while he would have to be moving a mile a minute to be back in time, I believe there is an opportunity during the study session for Chris to sneak away and open the Dark Fountains in the church. This opportunity comes when the soul flips the breakers, causing Susie and Noelle to go investigate the basement. While it's a very short window of time, I believe it's enough time for Chris to get to the church and open the fountains. Interestingly enough, this would happen right after Chris gets off of the phone with someone telling them about a dark fountain at the church that night. Chris potentially received orders to open those fountains instead of being told where someone else was going to open the fountains like many players have assumed. The only issue is that Chris probably would have just keeled over and died if he had to walk that far and back without the soul, so you know what, just take that whole section with a grain of salt. Either way, every Dark Fountain up until Susie's used the same color palettes for the Fun Gang, and seemed to be consistent with each other, implying they were opened by the same person. And we know for a fact that Chapter 3 Dark Fountain was opened by Chris, so that just seems to fall neatly in place. As well, I completely forgot to mention this till the end of the video, but in the Chapter 3 Dark Fountain, if the Roaring Knight is Chris's knife, that would explain how the Roaring Knight was able to communicate with Tenna almost instantly before the Fun Gang even had a chance to find him. And with that, that is the Roaring Knife theory. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any thoughts, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. Let me know if you think I'm onto something, or if I'm just pulling shit out of my ass at this point. Any comment helps me in the algorithm, so if you want to call me a dumbass, call me a dumbass. If the Roaring Knight isn't the knife, then it's Ralsei. Okay, bye. Ralsei is the knife. Not Ralsei is the Roaring Knight. No. If the Roaring Knight isn't the knife, then Ralsei is the knife. And not a Goat Simulator gift card for the Xbox. Okay, bye.